Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for my card today I pulled out the Honeybee Stamps Lotus Blossom stamp set. It's this tiny little stamp set that is one stamp. It's not a set, it's a stamp. And this one actually came out quite some time ago and I've been itching to use it, so I just inked it up. I just used Distress ink, it doesn't matter what you use, because I wanted to stamp it onto a little stack of post-it notes, and these are the post-it notes that have sticky across the whole back. And I have a stack of 4 here. So I just stamped it out so I have my outline, and then I'm just going to trim these out with my little detail cutting scissors. And by having them stacked like this, I'm getting them all cut in one pass. Saves me a ton of time and effort. I don't mind taking the time to cut masks, but I get really frustrated if I have to cut multiples of the same one. So this just saves a ton of time because I can do it all at once. So I went around the stamp lines. When I cut my mask, I cut either right on the line or right inside the line. If you cut outside the line, you're going to end up creating like shadowing when you're masking your images and whatnot. So I did that, and then I have some distressed watercolor paper here with the smooth side up, and I'm using the new MFT Extreme Black ink because I just got it. So far it's great. I've only used it this one time, so I can't like do a comprehensive review or anything like that. But inking up my stamp with this ink, and then I stamped it once, masked that off, stamped it 2 more times, and then I'm going to mask those off. Whatever you stamp first, that is the image that's going to appear in the front. With this sort of image, being so busy with all the petals and that, you don't notice it as much as you do with simpler images or different styles of images, but the masking definitely makes things look a lot cleaner. Otherwise, all these petals are going to be overlapping. So I just did the masking, and since I had so many, this was really quick and easy to do. So I just stamped a cluster of them along the lower right corner of this piece of watercolor paper. And this is the A2 size, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So after I was done all my stamping, I'm just going to peel off those masks, and I'm going to save those masks. I just stick them to the back of the backing sheet and keep it in the package with the stamp. So the next time I go to use this, I've got all those masks and can reuse them. So I'm using those Distress inks for my watercoloring here. I'm just smushing them onto my little plastic palette. And I chose the pink and the purple because I want to mix them together to create a slightly different shade of purple. So that's Spun Sugar and Shaded Lilac. And then I have Peacock Feathers and Chip Sapphire. And before I even got to adding the color, I'm just adding clean water first and going well outside the lines of all these images. This is something I picked up from... It was Kelly Lativola that does this. I channel her a lot when I do stuff like this, but I'm not near as funny and I'm not near as skilled. Her watercoloring just blows my mind constantly. Every time I see a card, I'm like, how did she do that? And then if you guys haven't watched her videos, you should, because she's hilarious. Like, it's hilarious. So I did my first layer. Very light, very simple, and then I dried it with my heat tool. And then I'm going in with a slightly smaller brush and using the exact same colors, just less water this time, to really intensify this. So still being really simple, I super sped this up. This is like 800 times faster than I actually did it. I still went fairly quickly. I wish I could move this quickly though, it would just save me so much time. But yeah, like I said, I didn't do anything fancy. I just applied the color. And then sometimes I would just dampen my brush with water and kind of pull it out a little bit to soften it here and there. But I wasn't really following any rules. You know, people ask me sometimes like how to add the shading, where to leave the lighter areas. More often than not, I just don't bother. I just want the color down. I think it looks just fine. It looks just fine as it is. So I was kind of jumping around so that each area would have a little bit of time to dry. But again, using images like this and doing, you know, letting the colors bleed out in the beginning, etc., you get that wiggle room, so it doesn't have to be perfect. And shockingly, I totally forgot to add splatter. I was thinking of it as I was doing it. I was like, oh, gotta pull out my Copic Opaque White, gonna do some splatter. Totally forgot. I thought about adding it in the end, but I left it. It's kind of bothering me, but I didn't add any splatter. So set it all aside to dry. And then I had die cut some light purple cardstock using the Honeybee Smile wafer die. And then I found some purple glitter cardstock that went really well with those colors. So of course I die cut that and stacked that on top. And I'm adhering everything together with my multi-medium matte adhesive. And then I just grabbed a scrap of black cardstock. I always just leave scraps like this just sitting on my desk because I use them all the time. Like and it's almost always for like stamping and embossing sentiments. So I use my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm using the coordinating Smile stamp set, which is another one of Honeybee's fabulous buildable stamp sets where you can build a million different sentiments. This one's a mini one compared to their ginormous like 6x8 sets with the tons of sentiments. So I chose a sentiment I wanted to use, and I inked it up with Versamark ink, and then I heat embossed it with white embossing powder. And then after I removed that anti-static powder, I held up the die cut sentiment because trying to figure out how wide I wanted to cut this banner. And then I'm going to trim this down with my Tim Holtz paper trimmer here. And then while I had this out, I decided to trim off about half an inch, about half an inch off the side of this watercolor panel, because I couldn't resist also adding this new black and white pattern paper. It had to happen. It had to go on this card. So trimmed out a piece of that. And then my card base is the same purple cardstock that I used to die cut the sentiment. So I cut that to 4 1/4 by 11. So I'm scoring it at 5 1/2. So it'll be a top folding A2 sized card. And I always kind of reline it up after I folded it to make sure the ends are straight, and then really burnish that with my bone folder to try and get the card like as straight as possible. And then I trimmed the sentiment on the black cardstock there, just trimmed the ends off with my scissors. And then I'm going to adhere that with my little Xyron tape runner here. So I'm going to adhere that to this little panel. I'm going to flip that over and cut off the piece that's hanging over the edge. And then I'm going to adhere the little pattern paper strip directly to my card base. And I had considered popping up the watercolor panel with some foam tape, but ended up deciding not to, and decided to adhere it flat to the card. So once I had my pattern paper adhered, I trimmed off the piece hanging over as well. And then I'm going to apply that same adhesive to the back of my little watercolor panel. And if it had warped more, it didn't really warp much at all, thankfully. I probably would have added the foam tape because the foam tape just gives it that extra like rigidity and holds it better in place, but this works just fine. So I adhered that to my card front, and then I'm going to adhere this sentiment with that same multi-medium matte adhesive. I just add little dots of it, and then to the thicker areas I just add a little thin line. And I prefer the multi-medium matte because if it does ooze out at all, it's going to dry matte. You're not going to see it. So got my adhesive on, and then press that onto my card front. Same with the little dot to the eye there. I'm going to just add a little dab of adhesive just directly. I find with little things like that, it's easier to add the adhesive directly to the card front and then bring the item to the card. Same with like little embellishments and whatnot. So after I got all the front almost done, I'm going to use another sentiment from the Smile stamp set. And before I got to that, I decided to ink up that Lotus stamp again. And I'm just inking it up with one of the distress inks and stamping out the inside of the card. Distress inks aren't the greatest for stamping. You especially notice it with solid images. These inks were not made for stamping. They're more for techniques and watercolor and direct to paper and all that fun stuff. But for something like this, I don't have a problem with it. It doesn't need to be perfect, because it's just gonna, you know, dry and just look nice, and just it gives the inside a little extra something. So I stamped the sentiment with that same black ink, and then to finish off this card, I pulled out the Honeybee Rainbow Rhinestone mix. These all have like almost like a mirror backing to them, so they're just really pretty. So I just kind of sprinkled them rather liberally on my card front, and then I'm just picking them up with my little jewel picker and pressing them into place after applying a little bit of that multi-medium matte adhesive. And I find with my jewel picker, more often than not, I kind of have to roll it almost, because sometimes it's too sticky. But I find if I roll it off the embellishment as I'm pressing it into the adhesive, that seems to work. So that's all for today. As always, check out the description box below the video. There will be links to the blog post and links to all the supplies used. So if you're interested, check that out below the video. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you all very soon in another video. Bye!